The rain had been falling for hours. Not the wild kind of storm that rattles windows and makes the evening news. Just a steady, patient rain. The kind that soaks into your jacket and into your thoughts. On a dim stretch of highway just outside a quiet Midwestern town, the streetlights glowed in soft halos. Their reflections shimmered across the black pavement like old memories, blurred but still there. A police cruiser sat at an angle near the guardrail, its headlights casting pale beams into the mist. A motorcycle lay on its side a few yards away, chrome dulled by rain, and kneeling in the middle of that lonely road was a man most people would have crossed the street to avoid. His name was Ray Callahan. He was 58 years old, broad shoulders, weathered face, gray threaded through his dark beard. A leather jacket clung to him, heavy with rain. On the back was the faded emblem of the Iron Horse Riders, an old motorcycle club that folks in town whispered about, though most of the stories were older than they were. Ray's hands were rough, scarred from decades of work, construction jobs, welding, long-haul rides under hot suns and cold skies. But at that moment those hands were trembling, because cradled carefully in his arms was Officer Melissa Grant. Melissa was in her early 40s, dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, her uniform soaked through, her badge glinting faintly in the light. A small cut marked her cheek, and there was blood on her side where the accident had taken its toll. She was conscious, barely. Her breathing was shallow. Ray had been riding home from visiting an old friend when he saw the cruiser's lights flicker and fade. He slowed. Most people might have kept going. There had always been tension between his kind and the badge. But Ray had lost a daughter once. And when you've known that kind of silence, you don't drive past someone in trouble. He set his bike down without even turning off the engine at first. He ran toward the cruiser, found Melissa slumped halfway out the door. "Ma'am," he had said softly, his voice gravelly but gentle. "Stay with me now." She had looked up at him, confusion in her eyes, perhaps even fear. A biker, leather, beard, patches. Life has a funny way of challenging our assumptions. Ray pressed his hand carefully against her wound, using his bandana to slow the bleeding. He spoke to her the way he once spoke to his daughter when she was scared of thunderstorms, slowly, calmly. "You're gonna be all right," he whispered. "Help's on the way, I'm not going anywhere." She tried to speak. He leaned closer. "My radio," she managed. He reached for it, his large fingers awkward against the small device. He had not held a police radio in his life, but he pressed the button. His voice carried over the line, steady as he could make it. "This is civilian. Officer down on County Road 16. She's breathing. Needs an ambulance now." There was a pause, static, then voices, urgent, alert. Within minutes, sirens echoed through the rain. Ray stayed exactly where he was, holding pressure, talking softly, telling Melissa about the sunrise he had seen that morning, about how rain always smells cleaner after midnight, about how sometimes strangers show up at just the right time. When the first patrol cars arrived, officers jumped out with weapons drawn, and what they saw stopped them cold. A Hell's Angel, at least that's what the patch suggested, kneeling in the road, soaked and shaking, holding one of their own as if she were family. "Easy," Ray said quietly, not looking up. "She's losing blood. Keep pressure here." He guided their hands, calm, focused. In that moment, there were no labels, no uniforms, no leather jackets, just human beings trying to save a life. Paramedics rushed in. They worked quickly, efficiently. Ray stepped back only when they insisted. His hands were stained red. Rain washed thin trails of it down his wrists. As they lifted Melissa onto the stretcher, her eyes fluttered open again. She searched the crowd, found him. For just a second, she reached out and gripped his sleeve. He leaned close so she wouldn't have to strain. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once, swallowed hard. "You just get better." The ambulance doors closed. Sirens faded into the distance. The officers remained. Some looked uncertain, some curious. One approached Ray carefully. "You're the one who called it in?" "Yes, sir." "Why didn't you leave?" Ray glanced down at the wet pavement, thought for a moment. "My little girl passed 12 years ago," he said quietly. "Car accident. Someone stayed with her until I got there. I never forgot that." There wasn't much else to say after that. They took his statement. No handcuffs, no suspicion, just simple questions. And then, something unexpected happened. One of the younger officers stepped forward and held out a clean towel from his cruiser. "For your hands," he said. It was a small gesture, but sometimes small gestures carry the most weight. Melissa survived the surgery. The wound had been serious but not fatal. The doctors later said that steady pressure in those first minutes had made all the difference. Word spread through the department quickly. The biker who stayed, the biker who called it in, the biker who didn't run. A week later, on a clear Sunday morning, Ray received a phone call. He almost didn't answer. It was an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Callahan?" the voice asked. "Yes. This is Sergeant David Morales. Officer Grant would like to see you if you're willing." He hesitated only a second. "I'll be there." The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and fresh flowers. Sunlight streamed through the blinds. Melissa sat propped up in bed, pale but smiling. Without her rain-soaked uniform, without the flashing lights, she looked younger somehow, softer. Ray stood awkwardly near the door, leather jacket folded over his arm this time. "I brought these," he said, holding up a small bouquet of wild daisies he had picked himself along the roadside. She laughed softly. "Those are perfect." There was a long pause. Not uncomfortable, just full. "I owe you my life," she said finally. Ray shook his head. "No, ma'am, you don't owe me anything. I just did what anyone should do." She looked at him carefully. Not everyone would have. That afternoon, they talked about simple things. About her teenage son who worried too much. About Ray's old workshop filled with half-finished projects. About how small towns hold on to stories longer than they should. Before he left, Melissa reached into the drawer beside her bed and pulled out her badge. Not to give it to him, but to show him something engraved on the back, her father's name. "He was a mechanic," she said. "Rode motorcycles. My mother hated it. But he always said, 'You judge a man by how he shows up when it matters.'" Ray smiled, slow and quiet. A month later, when Melissa returned to duty, something even more surprising happened. On her first shift back, as she pulled into the station parking lot, she saw a row of motorcycles lined neatly along the curb. Not revving, not causing trouble, just parked. Ray stood beside them, hands in his pockets. The iron horse riders behind him, men in their 50s and 60s mostly. Faces lined by time, eyes steady. When she stepped out of her cruiser, they removed their helmets. No speeches, no grand gestures, just respect. Some of the officers inside the station watched through the windows, and slowly, one by one, they stepped outside too. What happened next wasn't dramatic. No applause, no headlines, just handshakes, nods, quiet understanding. Two worlds that had circled each other for decades, finally standing still long enough to see the people underneath. Years later, folks in that town would still talk about the rainy night on County Road 16, but they didn't talk about it with shock anymore. They talked about it with something softer. Gratitude. Because as we grow older, we begin to understand something important. We are not the worst thing we've ever done. We are not the uniform we wear. We are not the patch on our backs. We are, at our core, the choices we make when no one is watching. Ray still rides, a little slower now, his beard whiter, his shoulders not quite as broad. Melissa still serves, her steps careful but steady, her son now grown. Every year on the anniversary of that rainy night, Ray leaves a small bouquet of daisies at the edge of County Road 16. Not for recognition, not for attention, but as a quiet reminder that kindness can arrive wearing leather, or a badge, or simply an ordinary face in the rain. And if you listen closely, on certain evenings when the road is empty and the streetlights hum softly, you might just hear the gentle echo of that lesson. Show up, stay, and hold on to one another when it matters most.